Hi, I'm John Hess. Welcome to Filmmaker IQ Presents Beat by Beat, where we deconstruct a film beat by beat to explore the inner workings of story. Tonight's film is the Disney Pixar masterpiece Coco. When I first saw Coco in late 2017, I became simply obsessed with the film. Not only is it visually beautiful, but story creators Lee Unkrich, Jason Katz, Matthew Aldrich, and Adrian Molina delivered pretty much an absolute perfect modern legend. Maybe I'm just a softie, but every time I've watched this movie, which is closing in on double digits now, I can't help but tear up because, not just because of the story, but for humanity's capability to tell stories like this. Now, Lee Unkrich first pitched the idea for Coco in 2010, after the release of Toy Story 3, which he also directed. Initially, it was to be about an American child learning about his Mexican heritage after the death of his mother. But they soon retooled the idea to focus on a Mexican child instead, and thankfully they did. Much has been written about and said about the Mexican influences of the film. While lots of care and effort were made into depicting the culture as authentically as possible, Coco is not really a Mexican story. It is a universal story told through a Mexican lens, or at least as close as they could get to a Mexican lens. Focusing solely on the Mexican elements is a trivial reading of the film, because at its core, Coco deals with themes that every culture on Earth wrestles with. In this analysis, I'm going to try to focus mainly on the fundamental story elements and the universal character archetypes, though I will point out some wonderful bits of filmmaking craft. So let's crack this open and go through Coco beat by beat. Hopefully you've already seen the film because it shouldn't need to be said, but spoilers from here on out.
Sometimes I think I'm cursed.
Coco is ultimately about the curse of the Rivera family. What that curse really is, I'll get to later in the film. But our hero's journey, that of the child Miguel Rivera, is essentially to lift the family curse, which is hinted at in the first 5 words of the film. Now, if you're familiar with Joseph Campbell's monomyth idea, sometimes I feel story analysis writers tend to put too much stock into the exact pattern Campbell describes. Coco is not the Star Wars type hero's journey, but there's a lot of strong mythic forces at play, the first of which is the curse. As Miguel explains in the opening monologue, his great-great-grandfather abandoned the family to pursue a career in music. For that sin, the great-great-grandmother, Imelda, banishes all music from the family. We are led to believe that this is the Rivera curse. No music.
No music. No music. No music.
Still, this curse is not entirely bad. In Imelda's eyes, it protects the family from terrible pain and loss. And in the following years, the family prospers and expands with a successful shoe business, which, for a fun bit of trivia, is also, whether it's connected or not, is also the same business that George Méliès's family was engaged in before he pursued magic and filmmaking. Anyway, through the eyes of our hero, Miguel, the curse of no music, now zealously enforced by Imelda's granddaughter, Miguel's abuelita, or grandmother, is the key point of contention between him and his family. Now, one day, on his way to shine shoes in the plaza, we get a bit of foreshadowing in the introduction of Dante, the Zolo street dog, after Miguel passes a stand selling alebrijes. The alebrije are these supernatural animals that guide our heroes, and it's fitting that he's named after the Italian poet who is best known for the Divine Comedy and Inferno, both works depicting the afterlife. In the movie itself, though, Dante is also the name of the horse of Miguel's idol who he rides in the movies. Dante, as we'll see, is part comic relief, though his main role is as an instigator who often leads Miguel to his major revelations. Now, when Miguel finally does arrive at the plaza, we get to see a statue of his idol, Ernesto de la Cruz, a superstar musician and a model of what fruits pure blind ambition can bring. He was a nobody, just like Miguel, but he got it all, only to be killed on stage by a falling bell. It's easy to gloss over this scene. Not only does it sequence introduce a version of the main Oscar-winning theme song, which is ultimately the key to breaking the Rivera curse, which happens to be written by the same husband and wife team that wrote Frozen. It is the first time that actual death is portrayed in the movie. Now, Pixar will say they really don't make kids' movies, but they are kid-friendly movies. And in the first 7 minutes, we see an actual death on screen. The falling bell doesn't just flatten De La Cruz like Wile E. Coyote. It kills him. Okay, it's kind of portrayed in a comedic way, but it is a real death. And if you're looking for symbolism, death by bell is pretty rich pickings. A bell is tolled for the dead. It is often seen as the instrument to communicate with spirits, and certainly there's a lot more meaning available with a bell than having him killed by, say, a falling par can. Back at the plaza, as Miguel shines on Mariachi's shoes, he learns not only about what he sees as his chance to fulfill his musical dreams by playing in a talent show, but also just what kind of consequences await him if he dare disobey the family rule. Here, as Abuelita assaults the mariachi with her slipper, or chancla, the consequences become all too real. Now, throughout this film, you will see many of the story points are not just told to you as I'm doing so right now, but shown in the actions of the characters themselves. It's not enough to say that the family forbids music. We must see the forcefulness of this rule, and we must see the consequences, and we'll see them many more times. And while we're on the subject, Coco does an amazing job of integrating the exposition required to describe this world into the story itself. I'm not going to point out every instance, but in every scene with exposition, there's something else going on as well. Take these following sequences. Abuelita brings Miguel home and tells his parents that she found him shining a mariachi's shoes. Everybody is shocked, and we get a small joke as his brother accidentally sends a shoe into the ceiling. And we see that not only are his parents against the idea, that even Miguel's own siblings mock him for thinking he can enter. This scene establishes that Miguel feels like an outsider even in his own family. Then Abuelita orders Miguel to the ofrenda to further explain the rules of this world. On one day a year, Dia de los Muertos, the spirits can cross over from the afterlife to visit and be reunited with their loved ones, so long as their photo is on someone's ofrenda. The family cooks their ancestors' favorite foods, sets out the things they love, all this, she says, to bring the family together. But on that particular line, what do we see but the photo on the top of the ofrenda is torn? The family is not together. But again, we'll get to the real curse in a little bit. Of course, Miguel has probably heard all of this 1,000 times before and disappears while Abuelita attends to her aging mother, Coco. Now, briefly, I've got to say this about Coco. What an amazing job they did with her animation and design. I grew up in a household with aging parents, and I can't help but look at Coco and not have my heart swell and my eyes moisten. Her voice and animation are spot on amazing. And if they didn't get that right, the center of the entire movie wouldn't work. But I am getting ahead of myself. Miguel escapes to the attic, where he has his very own personal ofrenda to his idol, Ernesto de la Cruz. Not only does he craft a copy of the idol's guitar out of scraps, ingeniously using nails as frets, he learned to play by studying old VHS tapes, which ironically most of the people in the audience probably wouldn't have had first-hand experience with, but to this 30-something, it totally makes sense. Now, two things I love about this attic sequence with the best of De La Cruz reel. First is Miguel's reaction to his idol kissing a woman, which is the perfect reminder that Miguel is still just a young, innocent boy. Innocent, but not pure of heart. He is, after all, a child, and a child will have to learn lessons on the quest he is about to take. Then, as Miguel plays along to the tape, the expression of pure ecstasy is so masterfully animated here. Every person who has played an instrument and managed to get this thing to sound just right will instantly recognize that expression of pure joy. The animators at Pixar really got it right, and they know what they're doing. In these sequences, we see how Miguel is ostracized from the family, we learn the rules of the world, and we get a taste of Miguel's musical ability and his passion for Ernesto de la Cruz and how he wants to follow in his footsteps. That's a lot happening here in these 3 scenes to lay the groundwork for the plot ahead. So as the family is making the final arrangements for Dia de los Muertos, Miguel attempts to sneak away, but gets caught. Then the family, acting out of love, decides it's time to set Miguel on the right path and have him officially join the family business. Miguel, being a child still, begrudgingly accepts, but Dante, acting in his capacity as both a hungry street dog and a spiritual guide, begins a series of events that leads to a reveal in Mama Imelda's photo. The photo depicts Miguel's great-grandfather holding the iconic guitar of his idol, leading Miguel to believe that Ernesto de la Cruz is actually his great-great-grandfather. He tries to convince his abuelita that this is a sign he should pursue music, but his joy is short-lived and crushed when abuelita smashes Miguel's guitar. Again, we are setting up a conflict of an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. Abuelita is only doing what Mama Imelda did, discouraging music to protect the family, to keep it strong. Miguel is acting on his calling, and that cannot be ignored. The smashing of the guitar is the last straw for Miguel, who runs away to the plaza intent on performing in the talent show. But there's one problem. He needs a guitar. And now the movie begins the plot of the main storyline. As we go over the following beats, notice how the plot is driven by a series of small obstacles that need to be overcome. There's an excellent video of Matt Stone and Trey Parker discussing this concept, the idea that each beat is separated not by a then, as in this happens, then this happens, but a but and therefore, as in this happens, but this happens, therefore that happens. Now, Miguel runs away from home to perform in the talent show, but he has no guitar. So he turns to the statue of his idol and asks, "What am I supposed to do?" And the statue responds in a beautiful and story-efficient way. Therefore, our hero finds himself in the cemetery, where, of course, Dante is, like any good spirit guide, right? He enters the crypt of his idol to steal the guitar for just one show. And with that first strum, poof, magic happens, and Miguel begins his quest into the underworld, though he doesn't know it just yet. At first, he's immediately terrified of getting caught, just like any regular child. And then he realizes that no living person can see or feel him. In the ultimate symbolism, he falls into an open grave. Hey, Dante, I don't think we're in Santa Cecilia anymore, at least not in the way he knows. Dante then guides Miguel to the members of his family that have crossed over to visit the Rivera family. But, there's that but there is a problem. Mama Imelda wasn't able to cross over. So Miguel and his family have to go back to the brilliant and beautiful underworld to see what the issue is. At the gates, we are introduced to Hector, here serving as a trickster trying to get back into the real world. But he's not allowed to cross over because his photo isn't on anyone's ofrenda. Even though this detail was described by Abuelita earlier, we are seeing the mechanics actually at play and reinforcing the conceit of the main plot line. The Rivera ancestors take Miguel to what would now be described as a customs office for the underworld, modeled after the turn-of-the-century architecture of the Palacio Postal in Mexico City. There, the Riveras find Mama Imelda stuck in a bureaucratic loophole. Now, since Miguel took Imelda's photo with him to the underworld, she cannot cross over because she's not on the ofrenda anymore. So they speak to a higher-ranking bureaucrat who explains, when Miguel took the guitar from Ernesto de la Cruz's crypt, he committed a serious crime, stealing from the dead, which cursed him to the underworld. To return to the world of the living, Miguel must get his family's blessing. And much like every supernatural spell, there's an expiration. He must get the blessing by sunrise or forever be stuck in the land of the dead. We also get a visual countdown as Miguel's physical form begins to disappear, revealing his skeleton as a reminder in much the same way that Marty McFly's pictures disappeared if he didn't get his parents back together in Back to the Future. It's not good to just be told of the deadline. Seeing it manifest itself really drives the point home. But there is an easy way out. Imelda offers her blessing so Miguel can go back to the real world if Miguel promises to never play music again. Miguel, being only a child, accepts it, but reneges on the promise almost immediately, only to be sent back into the underworld. This short, almost throwaway joke is a brilliant stroke in that it further shows Miguel's a child who will pretty much say whatever he can to get out of trouble, but also raises the stakes. You have to mean it for the magic to work. Mama Imelda's blessing comes with a condition. Therefore, Miguel plans to seek out Ernesto de la Cruz, who he thinks is his great-grandfather, and get his blessing, because he will understand his passion for music. And Miguel again runs away from his family. So now the hero is actively engaged in the quest, and we set up the major objective of the second act, if you're counting by acts. And that is to get to Ernesto de la Cruz and get his blessing. But how? In trying to escape the authorities and parents, Miguel overhears that Hector is a good friend of Ernesto. And realizing that Miguel might be his ticket back to visiting his family in the land, Hector agrees to help Miguel. Back on the Rivera family side, Mama Imelda enlists the help of her spirit guide, the powerful Pepita. After being disguised as a skeleton, Miguel spots a billboard advertising the Sunrise Spectacular hosted by Ernesto de la Cruz. Our big objective is getting more attainable, but Hector isn't as connected as he promised. But he does take Miguel to where the rehearsal for the concert is taking place. Miguel explores the rehearsal space, leading to one of my favorite sight gags. I mean, most older people who have studied a little bit of art would recognize exactly what that skeleton is doing as a classic nude pose. But it is just a skeleton, and yet it's funny the kind of reactions that everyone in the scene has, despite the fact that the joke will fly right over younger audiences' heads. And then we meet up with Frida Kahlo, the famous Mexican artist in charge of designing De La Cruz's show. She explains that De La Cruz doesn't do rehearsals, that he's too busy hosting a fancy party in his tower. Sorry, Mario, the princess in another castle, right? So now we have a new complication and a new objective. Get into that party. One of the band members mocks Hector for dying by choking on some chorizo, a misdirection, and tells Miguel about the music competition where the first prize gets an opportunity to play at the party. So now, to get to the party, we have a smaller quest, to win the music competition. But first we need a guitar. And just to put a little bit of tension on it, Miguel's family is closing in on him with the help of their powerful alebrije Pepita. To get the guitar, Hector takes Miguel to the outskirts of town where the nearly forgotten live before they are totally forgotten. There they meet Chicharron, a grumpy old friend of Hector who happens to own a guitar. But to obtain the guitar, Hector must perform a song, something he's been avoiding for a long time. Ultimately, he does so, revealing that despite his proclaimed disdain for musicians he displayed earlier, he is actually quite an accomplished musician himself. And now we get to the film's second depiction of death, though this one involves the final death, based on the Mexican concept of the three deaths. The first death is when your body ceases to function. The second death is when the flesh of the body is returned to the earth. The final death, now faced by Chicharron, is when no one living remembers you. This establishes that even in the land of the dead, you can die, putting real stakes on Hector as he is on the verge of being forgotten. It is this final death that will eventually become the main force in the film's story. But as I said before, we'll get to that soon. So, now we have our guitar. Miguel must face the challenge to perform for the first time in front of a crowd. The challenge will prove to him that he is worthy of Ernesto de la Cruz's blessing. At first, he is terrified, but eventually wins over the audience. Dante pushes Hector onto the stage, and the two are on the verge of winning the competition. But Miguel's family has located him and are closing in. This creates a rift between Hector and Miguel as he realizes that Miguel could have easily been sent back to the real world. For him, the stakes of his final death are much more dire than a life without music. But to Miguel, it's the opposite. He runs away again. Dante attempts to bring him back, but is unsuccessful. Miguel is cornered by Imelda and Pepita, but escapes into a back alleyway. Imelda catches up and makes one final plea to Miguel to return home. She does the unthinkable, and she sings to him, revealing to Miguel that she actually loves music. But when Imelda had Coco, she chose to settle down. Her husband chose to play for the world. They each chose their priorities, and now she poses the question to Miguel: come back, be with your family, or choose to run away like her husband did and choose a career in music. Miguel wants his family to back him. He knows they should, but realizes they won't. So he runs away to the big show, the Palace de la Cruz. His first attempt to get in doesn't work, but he sneaks in with a band that did win the music competition he ran away from. And when he gets to the palace, it's everything Miguel could ever imagine. Opulent and decadent, the alabaster shining city on a pedestal. To get de la Cruz's attention, Miguel sings a song before falling into a pool and is rescued by Ernesto de la Cruz himself. Miguel tells Ernesto that he is his great-great-grandson, and Ernesto accepts the fact with joy. A happy ending as de la Cruz shows his new family member off to all his friends. But despite the piles of material offerings from all his fans, Miguel feels something is off. Miguel asks if de la Cruz regrets saying goodbye to his family. Ernesto says he had to do it. As an artist with a capital A, we cannot belong to one family. The world is our family. So now we have framed the two conflicting viewpoints that led to the Rivera family curse. We have Imelda saying when her daughter Coco was born, she had more important priorities than music, and Ernesto being driven to adopt the world as a family. And now, in a completely empty and deserted hall, Ernesto is ready to send Miguel back. But before he can, Hector breaks in to hold Miguel to his promise. Hector recalls the words of his last night on Earth with Ernesto, but the attentive Miguel notices a bit of plagiarism, and we see the results of what Ernesto's blind ambition has led to. That Ernesto de la Cruz poisoned his partner Hector when he wanted to return to his family and stole the dead man's songs. In a flashback, we see Hector's final moments as he collapses. Our third death in this film. Ernesto has Hector thrown in a dungeon. Before he sends Miguel back to his home, he realizes that Miguel possesses information that could ruin his reputation. So he has Miguel taken away as well. Ernesto's words, success doesn't come easily. You have to do whatever it takes to seize the moment. If this isn't the antithesis of the messages in a film like Whiplash, I don't know what is. So Miguel is thrown into a sinkhole, into the belly of the whale, so to speak, right through the blowhole. Miguel finds Hector there and regrets abandoning his family. What's more, Hector is running out of time and being forgotten. He reveals that his daughter, Coco, is losing her memories. Miguel suddenly makes the connection and realizes that Hector is actually his great-great-grandfather. Unfortunately, once Coco passes away, there will be no one living who remembers Hector in life, and they will never be reunited in the land of the dead. Hector even reveals the origin of the main theme song, Remember Me, in one of the most heartwarming and tragic animations ever put on screen. As Coco fades to black, we realize that the dichotomy of the family versus stardom didn't lead to the Rivera's family curse. Imelda's husband didn't choose music over family. He loved his daughter. It was Ernesto's ambition that stole him from them. The family curse has nothing to do with music. It is the pain and suffering of a family torn apart. This is the point where Miguel realizes his place in the family. He is proud of his heritage. He is proud to be a Rivera. And when and only when he comes this awakening, the Alebrijes arrive to rescue him. Once saved, we get to see Imelda and Hector confront each other, probably for the first time. But Miguel intervenes on Hector's behalf, showing Imelda that maybe she misunderstood what happened, that Hector did want to come back. And now the hero's quest changes. It is no longer a matter of lifting the curse of no music. This is a quest to reunite the family, to right a wrong done in life that even brings suffering to those in the land of the dead, and to remind us of the real consequences. Hector collapses again as his time is running out. Imelda agrees to help, but they need to get Hector's photo from De La Cruz, so they crash the Sunrise Celebration concert. They find Ernesto, but in the ensuing fight, Imelda is thrust on stage and into the spotlight. To stall, she begins to sing with her husband Hector accompanying on guitar. She manages to evade security guards, but gets trapped in a duet with Ernesto before escaping to run back to Miguel and Hector. The family is starting to heal as Imelda softens her stance toward Hector and toward music. As Imelda prepares a blessing for Miguel to return home, she leaves out the condition of no music. But before he can be sent home, Ernesto grabs the child and throws him to the ground and goes into the archetypical bad guy speech. Now, Ernesto is nothing but pure ego. So to spoil his reputation, the Rivera family turns the camera on him and broadcasts Ernesto as he throws Miguel off the side of the stadium. Now, Miguel is falling to his death. The suspense isn't how Miguel will be saved, because let's face it, those alebrijes can save anyone. And if Pepita could save them from a sinkhole earlier, this is a walk in the park. But the real suspense is the loss of Hector's photo, his last chance to be remembered in the real world. The essence of the scene is not Miguel's fall, but Ernesto's fall from adoration, a fall inflicted by his own hubris and ego. This is classic form of Greek tragedy, fall by hubris. In a fitting end to Ernesto's story, Pepita sends him into a bell where he is again crushed, a bookend to his real-life death, perhaps a punishment for his own crime of stealing from the dead Hector. Despite the cheers of the crowd happy to see revenge enacted and a temporary victory, the tone turns as we still have no solution for the main problem of the story. Hector is being forgotten. The sun is rising and time is running out. Imelda and Hector bless a petal and press it to Miguel's heart and send him back. Back in the real world, Miguel needs to somehow revive Hector's memory. He takes Ernesto's guitar, really Hector's guitar, back home and runs to his great-grandmother Coco, trying to get her to remember her papa. And this one scene, perfectly performed, perfectly animated, is the heart of the legend. He can't get to her. Coco is gone. Miguel begins to cry because he failed to save his great-great-grandfather. But as he is about to apologize to Coco as instructed by his abuelita, his foot touches the guitar as if speaking out to him. Miguel delivers a gift from Hector through song. And slowly the memory begins to stir. And through this very thing that was banned, the curse on the Rivera family is lifted. Coco reveals that she's been keeping her father's letters and photos all along, the key that saves Hector from being forgotten. The power to break the spell was there from the very beginning. It just took a journey that a young boy had to make to bring back the gift of song to lift the curse. Now, I cannot make it through this scene without tearing up. Pixar found a way to make the sentimental scene, which they are masters of, the central plot point of the movie. In the film's coda, 1 year later, we learn that Ernesto de la Cruz's memory is being revised, and Hector's place is finally being granted. Miguel shows his new baby sibling, the ofrenda, and introduces her to those that have passed away, including the namesake of the film, Coco herself, the fourth and final reference to death in the film. Hector attempts to cross over. This time, he matches and is joined by his wife, Imelda, and the recently passed Coco. Back at the Rivera residence, the Alebrijes join in the celebration as the complete family is reunited for the first time. Stanley Kubrick once telephoned Stephen King during the production of The Shining and asked, "Don't you agree that all stories of ghosts are fundamentally optimistic, that ghosts are evidence that we survive death?" To which King responded, "Well, what about hell?" Now, Coco doesn't deal with hell or the theological questions surrounding punishment in the afterlife, but it is one hell of an optimistic story. Another piece of the rich cultural tapestry we construct to understand the harshest reality of nature and the most brutal emotional suffering we as humans endure, that of death. What makes Coco so unique in my mind is the story is born from a place of suffering. While Up, the last Pixar movie to make me cry, put the sentimentality up front as a setup for the call to adventure, Coco puts the pathos as the core central conflict. This may not be evident to everyone upon first viewing because of the story's misdirection. The Rivera family curse was the product of intense pain when Imelda perceived that Hector had abandoned her for music. She carried that pain with her her entire life, and 5 generations had to bear that suffering as well. That's pretty dark stuff for an animated family film. But it was all for naught as a determined young boy ended up bringing peace and unity back to the family. To me, the Coco is the quintessential lore. As a storyteller myself, my greatest desire would be to tap into that mythos myself, to create a story that might bring contentment, pleasure, and even joy to myself and someone else as we endure the long slog of existence. Maybe Coco hit that secret punch code to my psyche, but I consider it one of the most masterful pieces of story ever put on screen. You're welcome to disagree with me, but the act of breaking a movie down beat by beat can really reveal the structure and the humanity of the story. Try it on your favorite movies, and be on the lookout for more beat-by-beat analysis of my favorite films here on Filmmaker IQ. If you like this analysis, make sure, of course, to like and subscribe, as well as clicking on that bell. Hopefully nothing bad will happen with that bell. Consider supporting us via Patreon. Every little bit helps bring you more content, and we really, really do appreciate it. I'm John Hess. I'll see you next time at filmmakeriq.com.